The wind howled through the streets, the sound of it slicing the cold night air like a blade. A street lamp flickered in the distance, casting long shadows on the snow-covered pavement. In the midst of the silence, the shrill ring of a phone shattered the stillness. The billionaire, Richard Bennett, stared at the phone for a moment, his heart racing as he pressed the accept button. "Hello?" he said, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of the moment. A small, frantic voice came through the receiver, barely audible over the sounds of sirens and passing cars. "Sir, Mr. Bennett, your son. Your son is unconscious on the street. He's bleeding badly." Richard's breath caught in his throat. His world, the world he had carefully built over the years, seemed to stop in that instant. His mind raced as he tried to comprehend the words. "Where is he?" Richard's voice was tight with panic, his hands shaking as he gripped the phone tighter. "South Bronx, near 146th Street and Willis Avenue. By the park," the voice replied, trembling. "Please, you need to come quickly. He's not waking up." Richard's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He could feel the weight of each passing second, the urgency of the situation, and the helplessness that gripped him. His son, his only child, was in danger. Richard didn't waste another second. Without a word to his assistant, he stood up and rushed toward the elevator. His thoughts were a whirlwind, racing faster than his feet could carry him. As the elevator doors closed, he pulled his coat from the rack, barely noticing the cold leather against his skin. The city outside seemed distant, unreal, as if the entire world had blurred into a single, insistent point of focus. His son. The helicopter ride was a blur. Richard couldn't remember the last time he had been in such a rush, his mind consumed with fear and regret. He thought of his son's face, of the quiet moments they had shared before, moments that now felt like distant memories. The helicopter descended rapidly, the city's skyline flashing by in the dying light of day. As they neared the park, Richard's pulse quickened, his body tense. His mind flashed back to the last time he had spoken to his son, the brief words exchanged before he left the house that morning. Richard could still hear the faint echo of his son's voice. "Bye, Dad." The words had felt hollow then, and now, they felt like a premonition. The helicopter landed with a jolt, and Richard didn't wait for it to come to a complete stop. He jumped out, the cold biting at his skin as he sprinted toward the scene. Paramedics were already at the scene, crouched beside his son, whose pale face seemed to shimmer in the harsh glow of the streetlights. Richard could see the blood pooling around his son's head, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His son was still alive, but barely. He was a fragile, broken figure lying in the street, and Richard's heart felt as if it was being crushed under the weight of the moment. He knelt beside his son, tears threatening to spill as he gently touched his cold, clammy skin. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Buddy, can you hear me?" No response. Richard's hands trembled as he stroked his son's hair, hoping for any sign of life. And then, through the crowd of onlookers and emergency workers, Richard saw her. A small figure, standing apart from the chaos. A young black girl, no older than 6 or 7. Her clothes ragged and soaked from the cold. She was staring at him with wide, dark eyes, her expression filled with a mixture of concern and something else, something deeper. The girl approached slowly, her tiny feet clicking on the pavement. "I called you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard looked up, confused. "What? How do you know?" The girl's gaze shifted to his son, then back to Richard. "He was crying before he passed out," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized that anyone had witnessed what had happened. "Where is he?" Richard asked, his voice urgent. The girl pointed towards the corner of the park, her small hand trembling slightly. Richard's pulse quickened as he followed her gaze, realizing for the first time that someone had been there for his son when he couldn't be. The girl had stayed with him. She had cared for him when no one else had. He didn't know why she had done it, but in that moment, all that mattered was that she had. As Richard turned back to the girl, he reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of his phone. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft, but full of gratitude. The girl only nodded, her gaze never leaving his son. "I just wanted him to be okay," she whispered, barely audible. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know who this little girl was, but in that moment, she had done more for his son than anyone else had. She had saved him in ways Richard could never have imagined. Richard stood frozen, staring at the small black girl who had called him just moments before. His heart was still racing, but now, confusion took its place. He glanced back at his son, lying motionless on the cold pavement, and then back at her. How did she know his son? How did she even know to call him? The paramedics were working furiously, but the girl's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk. He was crying before he passed out. Asterisk. His son, crying. Richard hadn't known. His chest tightened at the thought. He was so absorbed in his work, in his own life, that he hadn't even noticed the pain his son must have been carrying. Asterisk, I failed him. Asterisk, Richard thought, a cold knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. Who are you? Richard asked the girl, his voice quiet but sharp. She stood there, her arms wrapped around her tiny body for warmth. Her clothes were torn, her shoes mismatched, and her face was streaked with dirt. But her eyes, those eyes were filled with something beyond her years. My name is Anna, she said softly, almost hesitantly. I saw him lying there, and I knew you were his father. I called you. Richard felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. A little girl, no older than 7, had been the one to help his son when he was lying unconscious, unable to defend himself. Why were you there? How did you know? Richard asked, trying to piece together what was happening. Anna shifted her weight from one foot to the other, glancing nervously at the ambulance workers. I was walking by, and I saw him. I didn't know what happened, but he was hurt. I didn't want him to be alone. I thought maybe you'd come if I called. Her words hit him like a punch. This little girl had cared enough to stay with his son, to call for help when she had every reason to walk away. Richard didn't know why, but something inside him shifted. Asterisk. She saved him. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk. She saved my son. Asterisk. Richard swallowed hard. Thank you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Anna looked up at him with wide eyes, her face softening. I just wanted him to be okay, she said simply. Her voice, so small and innocent, shattered something inside Richard. He hadn't been there for his son. But this little girl had been. She had been there when it mattered most. As the paramedics prepared to move Ethan into the ambulance, Richard followed, his mind still reeling. He barely noticed the cold as it bit at his skin, or the way his body trembled as he walked. He felt lost in the chaos, disconnected from everything around him. Anna was still standing there, her eyes trained on the ambulance, her small figure outlined against the harsh glow of the streetlights. Richard couldn't help but notice how still she was, how calm, even in the midst of all the turmoil. He stopped in his tracks and turned to face her. Where are you going? He asked. Anna hesitated before answering. I'm going to the shelter. It's not far from here. The words hit Richard like a punch. She was homeless, alone, and yet she had cared for his son, put herself in danger, all without hesitation. He could barely comprehend it. You shouldn't be out here alone, Richard said, his voice filled with concern. It's too dangerous. Anna shrugged slightly. I'm used to it. Richard stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do. He barely knew this child, but in that moment, he felt an overwhelming need to protect her. I can give you a ride, he said. Surprising even himself, Anna looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the offer. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. Richard walked toward the car, his mind spinning. He had just witnessed something he couldn't fully grasp. A child had been the one to save his son, to be the one who stayed, who acted when everyone else seemed paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. He opened the door for her, and Anna climbed into the car, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. Richard didn't speak at first as they drove through the city streets, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Why did you help him? He asked finally, breaking the silence. Anna didn't immediately answer. She just stared out the window, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she spoke. Because no one else did. He was alone. And I didn't want him to be scared. I've been scared before. I didn't want him to feel that way. Richard's throat tightened. The way she said it so simply, so matter-of-fact, made his heart ache. Asterisk. She's only a little girl. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk. She's been through things no child should have to endure. Asterisk. The car ride seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually they reached the shelter. Anna got out of the car, her small frame disappearing into the shadows. Richard watched her go, his mind heavy with the weight of the evening. He had come here to save his son, but it was Anna who had saved them both. He couldn't shake the image of her, standing there, so calm and determined, in the face of a world that had failed her in so many ways. He knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just let her disappear into the night, into the shadows, and forget her. Something in him had changed. He wasn't sure what, but he knew he would find a way to help her. He couldn't let her fall through the cracks, not after what she had done for his son. Richard sat in the sterile, quiet waiting room of the hospital, his hands clasped tightly together, his mind racing. The events of the night seemed almost surreal now, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His son, Ethan, still unconscious, was in the intensive care unit, and the doctors had told him that the next few hours would be critical. As he sat there, unable to do anything but wait, his thoughts kept returning to the girl, Anna. She had called him when no one else would, stayed with his son when no one else did. Richard couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward her, but there was something more. She had been so calm, so steady in the face of everything. It was a stark contrast to the way Richard had felt, helpless and frantic. The hospital doors opened, and Richard looked up, his pulse quickening. The doctor stepped inside, his face grim. "Mr. Bennett, we've stabilized your son for now. He's still unconscious, but we're doing everything we can." Richard stood quickly, his heart leaping into his throat. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Of course," the doctor replied, his tone softening. "He's in the ICU, but we'll let you in for a moment." Richard followed the doctor down the quiet hallways of the hospital, his footsteps echoing in the sterile, empty space. The sound of distant beeping machines filled the air, and Richard's heart seemed to beat in time with the rhythm of the monitors. When they reached the ICU, the doctor gave him a nod and opened the door. Richard stepped inside, his eyes immediately landing on his son. Ethan lay in the bed, connected to various machines that beeped and hummed around him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Richard's chest tightened at the sight of him, his son so small and vulnerable, lying there with no way to defend himself. He approached the bedside slowly, his breath catching in his throat. He reached out and gently brushed Ethan's hair from his forehead, his hand trembling as he touched his son's cold skin. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice breaking, "please come back to me. Please, I'm so sorry." The words felt empty, meaningless. He had failed as a father, and now his son was paying the price. As he stood there, consumed by guilt, Richard's mind returned once again to Anna. She had been the one to stay with Ethan, the one to call him when no one else did. She had been his son's protector when Richard couldn't be. Richard's heart ached as he thought about the little girl. Asterisk. Why did she help him? Asterisk. He had so many questions, so many things he didn't understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from behind him. "Mr. Bennett?" Richard turned quickly, startled. It was Anna, standing in the doorway of the ICU, her eyes wide with concern. Richard blinked, surprised to see her there. "Anna?" he said, his voice low with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" The girl stepped inside slowly, her eyes never leaving Ethan. She looked so small in the hospital room, her clothes still ragged and worn, but her presence was like a beacon in the dark. "I wanted to check on him," Anna said quietly. I couldn't just leave him like that. I had to know he was okay." Richard's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at her. She had already done so much for his son. And now she was here, wanting to help more. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to thank her for what she had done. "Thank you," he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Anna nodded, her gaze still fixed on Ethan. "I'm glad he's still alive," she whispered. "He didn't deserve this." Richard's heart clenched at the raw honesty in her voice. This little girl, who had been through more hardship than anyone should have to endure, was the one speaking the truth. She was the one who saw what was important, who understood the value of human life. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Richard said, his voice barely audible. "You saved my son." Anna turned to look at him, her eyes softening. "I didn't save him," she said. "I just made sure he wasn't alone." Richard's chest tightened as he fought back tears. Asterisk, she's right. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk, she didn't save him. She just made sure he wasn't alone. Asterisk. And in that moment, Richard realized something. He had spent so many years building his empire, focusing on the wrong things. He had been so wrapped up in his own success, his own ambitions, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. Asterisk his son. Asterisk his family. The people who needed him. The people who relied on him. Asterisk Anna understood that. Asterisk. She understood the value of a single life, the importance of being there for someone when they needed it most. As Richard stood there, looking at Anna, he knew his life would never be the same again. He had failed his son, but this little girl had reminded him of what really mattered. He reached out slowly and placed his hand on her shoulder. "You're right," he said softly. "You made sure he wasn't alone." Anna nodded, a small bittersweet smile on her face. "I'm glad I could help," she said quietly. "But I think he's going to be okay. He's strong." Richard nodded, unable to speak. He watched as Anna stepped back toward the door, her small figure disappearing into the hallway. As the door clicked shut behind her, Richard stood there for a long moment, lost in thought. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. His son was still alive, and, with people like Anna in the world, maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. Richard sat in the sterile hospital room, his fingers tapping nervously against his leg. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the silence. He had just seen his son, Ethan, for the first time since the ambulance had arrived. Ethan was still unconscious, lying there so small, so fragile. His mind was spinning. Asterisk, how could this happen? Asterisk, asterisk, what did I miss? Asterisk. Richard had been so consumed by his work, so wrapped up in the demands of his business empire, that he had failed to see the signs. He had failed his son. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Matthews standing in the doorway. "Mr. Bennett," the doctor said, his voice measured, "I have the results of Ethan's scans. We've been able to stabilize him, but we need to monitor him closely. There's still no guarantee that he'll wake up, but we're doing everything we can." Richard nodded, his heart sinking. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "Thank you, doctor. Just keep me posted." The doctor nodded and stepped out, leaving Richard alone again. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, the overwhelming fear that he might lose his son gnawing at his insides. Asterisk. I can't lose him. Asterisk, Richard thought. Asterisk. I can't let that happen. Asterisk. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind racing in 1,000 directions. He thought about the conversation he had had with Anna earlier. The little girl had shown him a side of life he hadn't truly understood: compassion, selflessness, and strength. She had been the one to step in when no one else did, the one who had called him, kept his son company, and made sure he wasn't alone. Richard felt a knot form in his stomach as he thought about the situation she had described. Asterisk. She had saved him. She saved Ethan when I couldn't. Asterisk. He had been too focused on himself, on his work, on his empire. His son had needed him, and he had failed to see it. And then there was Anna, a girl who had nothing but the clothes on her back, who had chosen to help someone in need. Asterisk, how can I ever repay that? Asterisk, Richard knew he needed to find a way to thank her, to show his gratitude for everything she had done. He couldn't let her slip through the cracks, not after what she had done. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Anna standing in the doorway of the room, her small figure silhouetted against the bright hallway lights. She was holding a bag in her hands, her clothes still ragged, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. "Anna," Richard said, his voice hoarse, "what are you doing here?" Anna stepped into the room slowly, her eyes glancing over at Ethan. I wanted to check on him," she said quietly. "I couldn't just leave him. He looked so scared. I didn't want him to be alone." Richard's heart clenched. Asterisk. She's only a child. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk, and yet she understands what I've missed. Asterisk. He motioned for her to come closer. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for being there for him. Anna looked up at him, her face softening. I just wanted him to be okay, she said. He's strong. He'll be all right. Richard shook his head, his throat tightening. I don't know how to repay you, he said, the words feeling so inadequate. You've done more for my son than I could ever thank you for. Anna shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. I didn't do anything special, she said, her voice quiet. I just stayed with him. He needed someone. Richard knelt down in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. No, he said firmly. You did something special. You showed him kindness when no one else would. You saved him, and I'll never forget that. Anna looked up at him, her eyes wide, as if she hadn't fully understood the gravity of what Richard was saying. But I don't have anywhere to go, she said softly. Richard's heart broke at the words. The little girl had done so much for his family, and yet she had no one to turn to. You don't have to go anywhere, Richard said, his voice firm. You're not going anywhere. You're staying with us. You're part of the family now. Anna blinked, her eyes filled with disbelief. But I don't want to be a burden, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard shook his head. You're not a burden. You're a gift. And we're going to make sure you're safe. Anna's face softened, and she nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know what to say. Richard smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. Just know that you'll always have a place here, with us. He stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder. Now, let's make sure Ethan wakes up. We've got a lot to be thankful for, and we're going to make sure he knows it. The room fell silent for a moment as Richard looked at his son, still lying unconscious in the bed. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Anna by their side, he felt a glimmer of hope. They would make it through this together, and somehow, Richard knew that things would never be the same again. Not after what Anna had done for them, not after the way she had changed their lives. The days that followed were a blur for Richard. His son, Ethan, was stable but still unconscious. The doctors had done all they could for now, and they assured him that the next 24 hours were critical. Richard spent most of his time at the hospital, sitting by Ethan's side, barely moving. He had never felt so helpless, so powerless. Every time he looked at his son, he was reminded of how he had failed him. He had missed the signs, missed the moments that mattered. But one thing had changed. Anna, the little girl who had saved his son's life. Anna was now staying with them at the mansion. Richard had insisted she stay with them, though she had hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect. She had no family, no home to return to, and yet she had stayed by Ethan's side when Richard couldn't. She had been the one to call for help, the one to make sure Ethan wasn't alone in his moment of need. Richard couldn't help but feel indebted to her. She had shown him what it truly meant to care for someone, to put others before yourself. Richard knew he had to make things right, not just for Ethan, but for Anna as well. He couldn't leave her in a shelter, struggling to survive when she had already done so much for his family. One evening, as Richard sat in the study, staring at papers that needed his attention but could hardly keep his focus, he heard a soft knock on the door. He looked up to see Anna standing in the doorway. She had changed into clean clothes, but her eyes still held that same quiet strength. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Richard nodded, motioning for her to come in. "Of course," he said, setting his papers aside. Anna stepped into the room, her small hands fidgeting nervously in front of her. I wanted to thank you," she said, her gaze downcast, "for letting me stay here. I know I don't belong in a place like this." Richard's heart broke at her words. "Anna," he said softly, standing up and walking over to her. "You belong here. You've done more for us than I could ever repay. I'm just trying to make things right." Anna looked up at him, her eyes wide. "But I don't want to be a burden. I just want to help. I don't know what to do. I'm not used to having people care about me." Richard reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not a burden," he said, his voice steady. "You're family now, and we're going to take care of you. I'm going to make sure you have everything you need. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." Anna swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Richard smiled warmly at her. "You don't have to thank me. You've already given us so much. Just being here, just being yourself, that's enough." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. But then, Anna looked up at Richard, her eyes suddenly determined. "I want to help with Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Richard blinked in surprise. "You want to help?" he asked. Anna nodded. "I know he's my family now," she said softly, "and I don't want him to feel alone. I want to be there for him, like I was before." Richard's heart swelled with gratitude. This little girl who had already done so much was now offering to help his son. "Anna, I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You've already done more than enough," but Anna shook her head. "I don't want thanks," she said. "I just want to make sure he's okay. I want him to know that he's not alone. I want him to know that I'm here." Richard smiled softly, feeling a rush of emotion. "I'll make sure he knows. I promise." As the days went on, Anna kept her word. She would visit Ethan every day, sitting by his side, talking to him softly, telling him stories. She'd hold his hand and stroke his hair, doing everything she could to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. Richard watched as Anna bonded with Ethan, the two of them forming a connection that Richard couldn't have imagined. It was like they understood each other in a way that no one else could. Anna, the little girl who had saved Ethan's life, was now helping him heal. It was a miracle. Richard knew that he could never repay Anna for what she had done for his family, but he would do everything in his power to make sure she never felt alone again. And maybe, just maybe, they would all heal together. As the weeks went by, Ethan slowly began to wake up. His eyes fluttered open one morning, and the first thing he saw was Anna sitting by his side, holding his hand. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. Ethan blinked, confused at first, but then a small smile tugged at his lips. "I'm here," Anna said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Richard watched from the doorway, a tear slipping down his cheek. His son was awake, and for the first time in a long time, Richard felt hope. Hope for the future, hope for his family, and hope for Anna, the girl who had saved them all. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions for Richard. Ethan was recovering, slowly but surely, but the guilt still weighed heavily on him. The truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed so many signs, so many moments that could have changed everything. The accident, the pain his son had gone through, it could have been avoided. But then, there was Anna. She had been a constant presence, and with her had come a sense of clarity he hadn't felt before. As he watched his son make small but significant improvements every day, Richard knew he needed to take action, not just for Ethan, but for Anna as well. She had already done so much for them, and he knew he could never fully repay her for what she had done, but he had to try. One evening, after another long day at the hospital, Richard sat in the grand living room of their mansion, his thoughts once again circling back to Anna. She had become an integral part of their lives, and in a way, she had become his anchor, the person who helped him see beyond his own struggles. He knew he had to do something to show her how much she meant to him. As he sat in the dim light of the fireplace, he heard a soft knock at the door. He looked up to see Anna standing in the doorway. She had grown more comfortable in the house over the past few weeks, but there was still a nervousness about her. She was always careful, always tentative, like she was waiting for someone to tell her she didn't belong. Richard waved her in. "Anna, come on in," he said, motioning to the chair next to him. She hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting down, her small frame still seeming so out of place in the grand room. "How's Ethan today?" she asked, her voice soft, the concern in her eyes evident. Richard sighed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He's doing better. The doctors say it'll still take some time, but he's awake, and he's making progress. I think he's starting to remember things again." Anna nodded, her face lighting up with a quiet sense of relief. "I'm so glad to hear that," she said. "I knew he was strong. He'll be okay." Richard smiled at her, the gratitude in his eyes. "You were right about that. He is strong, and he has you to thank for that, Anna." Anna looked up at him, surprised by the intensity of his words. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just stayed with him. I didn't want him to feel alone." Richard's heart swelled. He had spent so much of his life focused on success, on building his empire, that he had never truly understood the weight of connection, the importance of being there for someone when they needed it most. "Anna," he said, his voice serious, "you did more than just stay with him. You saved him. You showed him kindness when no one else did. I can never thank you enough for that." Anna looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her voice quiet. "I just wanted him to be okay. That's all. I didn't want him to feel like he was invisible, like nobody cared about him." Richard could feel the lump forming in his throat. He had been so focused on his own life, on his business, that he had failed to see the signs. Asterisk. Ethan had been invisible to me. Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk. But you saw him. You saw what I missed. Asterisk. There was a long pause before Richard spoke again. "Anna, I know you're not used to having people care about you, but I want you to know that I do, and I'm going to make sure you're never alone again." Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with surprise, as if she couldn't quite believe what he was saying. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small. Richard took a deep breath. "I want you to stay here, Anna, with us. You're part of this family now. I don't want you to go anywhere. I want to take care of you, just like you've taken care of Ethan." Anna's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at Richard, as if trying to process his words. "But I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be a burden." Richard shook his head firmly. "You're not a burden. You never have been. You're family, Anna, and family takes care of each other." He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've already given us so much. You saved my son's life, and I'll never forget that." Anna's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting Richard to see her cry. But Richard saw. He saw everything, the fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty, and in that moment, he knew he had to make things right. "I don't know what to say," Anna whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Richard said gently. "Just know that you have a home here, and you're not alone anymore." Anna looked up at him, her face softening with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't think I've ever had anyone say that to me before." Richard smiled, his heart full. "You've got a lot of people here who care about you now, and we're not going anywhere." As they sat there, in the quiet warmth of the room, Richard knew that everything was beginning to change. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, and he knew that with Anna by his side, they would all find their way back to each other, stronger than before. The following day, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the skyline. He was sitting in his office at home, trying to focus on the work piling up, but his mind kept drifting to Ethan, still in recovery, and to Anna, the girl who had saved his son's life. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward her. She had done more than anyone could ever imagine, but there was something nagging at him. Something he couldn't ignore. He picked up his phone, dialing the number of his most trusted associate, David. "David, I need you to look into something for me," Richard said, his voice firm. "There's something I can't quite figure out." David, always efficient and sharp, agreed immediately. "What do you need, Richard?" "I need you to check into the background of a little girl," Richard began, his voice betraying his unease. "Her name is Anna. She's been living here with us. And she's done something for my son that no one else has." David's voice remained steady, though Richard could tell he was intrigued. "What's the issue, Richard? You're saying there's more to this girl than what you've been told." Richard took a deep breath. "I don't know. It's just... something feels off. She's been here for a while now, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something she's not telling us. I need you to find out who she really is. I want to know everything." "Understood. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something," David replied. Richard hung up the phone, his mind racing. Asterisk. Why did I feel this way? Asterisk. Anna had been nothing but kind, selfless, and devoted to his son. But Richard couldn't ignore the strange feeling of doubt that had crept in. He needed answers. Later that evening, as he sat down for dinner with Anna and Ethan, his thoughts were still heavy with questions. Ethan was eating slowly, but there was a spark in his eyes that Richard hadn't seen in a long time. He had come back to life, in more ways than one. Anna sat across from him, her eyes focused on Ethan, watching him carefully. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Richard studied her for a moment. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, but also a certain hesitation, as if she was waiting for something, or perhaps hiding something. Just as he was about to speak, his phone buzzed on the table, startling him. He picked it up quickly, seeing that it was a message from David. "I found something," it read. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He quickly tapped on the message. "She's not who she says she is. I have the details. Call me when you can." Richard's stomach dropped. Asterisk. What does that mean? Asterisk. He stood up abruptly, excusing himself from the table. Anna looked up at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Richard paused for a moment, his hand on the door. "I need to make a call," he said, his voice quieter than usual. He could see the concern in Anna's eyes, but he couldn't afford to let her see his growing unease. He stepped into the study and closed the door behind him, dialing David's number. "David, what did you find?" Richard asked, his voice strained. David's voice came through the phone, calm and direct. "I looked into Anna's past. There's no birth certificate, no records of her family. Nothing that traces her back to where she says she's from. It's like she just appeared." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Asterisk. What did you mean? Nothing traces back to her. Asterisk. "I don't understand," Richard said, his mind struggling to catch up. "What do you mean by appeared?" "I mean there are no official records," David continued, his tone cautious. "No records of her birth, no school records, no nothing. The address she gave is tied to a small house, but no one remembers her. I checked with the shelter she said she stayed at. They don't have any record of her ever being there." Richard's breath caught in his throat. This didn't make sense. Asterisk. "She saved my son's life. How could this be possible?" Asterisk. "Are you saying that Anna isn't who she says she is?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's what I'm telling you," David replied. "There's something off about this whole situation, but I don't have all the details yet. I'm still digging." Richard's mind was spinning. Asterisk. How could this be happening? Asterisk. Asterisk. Was she lying? Asterisk. Asterisk. What is she hiding? Asterisk. "Keep looking, David," Richard said, his voice tight. "And let me know as soon as you find anything else." He ended the call and sat there for a moment, stunned. His mind raced with questions, doubts, and fear. Anna had been nothing but kind, nothing but helpful, but now he couldn't help but wonder if everything he had believed was a lie. He stepped back into the dining room, where Anna and Ethan were still sitting, and immediately he noticed the change in the air. Anna's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it fear, or was it something else? She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile from earlier. There was something guarded about it now. "Is everything okay?" Anna asked again, her voice quiet. Richard didn't know how to respond. The weight of what he had just learned pressed heavily on him. He had to know the truth. He had to find out what Anna was hiding. But right now, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Richard couldn't sleep that night. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and questions, all revolving around Anna. How could she be lying about everything? The image of the little girl who had saved his son, who had been so selfless, so determined to help, now felt like a lie. He kept replaying the conversation with David in his head. Asterisk. No birth records, no school records, no history at all. Asterisk. Everything about Anna seemed to have vanished into thin air, and Richard couldn't make sense of it. Asterisk. Why would she lie? Asterisk. Asterisk. What does she want? Asterisk. He glanced over at Ethan's bedroom door, where his son slept, finally drifting off into a peaceful slumber after weeks of being in a constant state of recovery. Ethan was doing better. He was speaking more, smiling more, and seemed like his old self again, but something was still off. Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He thought back to all the moments when Anna had been by Ethan's side, how she had stayed with him when Richard couldn't. Asterisk. She saved his life. Asterisk, Richard thought. But if what David said was true, Then who was she really? Richard stood up from his bed, pacing across the room. He knew he had to confront Anna, had to get to the bottom of this, no matter how much it hurt. If she was hiding something, he needed to know. There were too many unanswered questions. Richard walked down the hallway and quietly opened the door to the guest room where Anna was staying. He paused for a moment, watching her silhouette in the dim light, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. She seemed peaceful, innocent even. But Richard had learned the hard way that nothing was ever as it seemed. He quietly stepped into the room, his footsteps barely making a sound. He stood over her for a moment, his thoughts churning. Asterisk. How did she get here? Asterisk. He took a deep breath before gently shaking her awake. Anna stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him with a mix of surprise and confusion. "Mr. Bennett?" she whispered, her voice soft and groggy from sleep. "Is everything all right?" Richard stood still for a moment, unsure of how to begin. He couldn't ignore the feeling that had grown within him. Asterisk. I need to know the truth. Asterisk. Anna, he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I need to talk to you. It's important. Anna sat up, rubbing her eyes, clearly still half asleep. What's going on? Is it about Ethan? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Richard hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, but it's not just about Ethan. It's about you. Anna's face tightened, her expression shifting from confusion to caution. What about me? She asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. Richard looked at her, the uncertainty in his eyes giving way to something stronger. David found something. There's no record of you. No birth certificate, no school records, no history. You're not who you say you are, Anna, and I need to understand why. Anna's eyes widened, her face paling slightly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, as if unsure of how to explain. Richard took a step closer, his voice firm but compassionate. You've done so much for Ethan. You've been a part of our family now. But I need to know the truth. What are you hiding? Anna remained silent for a long moment, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to lie to you, Mr. Bennett, she began, her voice trembling. I never meant to hurt anyone, but I couldn't tell you the truth. I had to keep it all hidden. Richard's heart tightened at her words. What truth? He asked softly. Where are you really from, Anna? She looked down at her hands, as if gathering the strength to continue. I'm not from here. I don't have a family. I don't even know where I come from, she said, her voice breaking. I've been living on the streets for as long as I can remember. I've been through things that no child should ever have to go through. Richard's chest tightened. He had known that Anna had a rough past, but hearing her say it in her own words made everything feel so much heavier. I was alone. I didn't know where to go. I just wanted to help. I saw Ethan, and I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let him be alone, not after everything I've been through. Her voice cracked as she continued. I've been abandoned my whole life, Mr. Bennett. I didn't want to be abandoned again. So I stayed. I stayed because I thought maybe you would care. Maybe someone would care. Richard's heart broke for her. He hadn't known the depth of her pain, the reasons behind her actions. He hadn't known what she had been through. You're not alone anymore, Anna, Richard said, his voice gentle but firm. You're not abandoned. You're part of this family, and you don't have to hide anymore. Anna looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? She whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Richard nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. You're not alone. You've never been alone. I know it's hard to believe, but we're here for you. We care about you, Anna. You're part of us now, and that's not going to change. Anna's tears finally spilled over as she collapsed into his arms, her small frame trembling. Richard held her tightly, his heart heavy with emotion. He had finally uncovered the truth, the real truth about Anna, and he knew that he would never turn his back on her. She wasn't just the girl who saved his son. She was a child who had been lost and alone for too long. But now, she had found a place where she belonged, and Richard was determined to make sure she never felt abandoned again. The tension in the air was palpable as Richard sat in the grand living room, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Anna had told him the truth, the painful truth about her past. She was a child who had been abandoned, a child who had learned to survive on the streets, a child who had saved his son and had done so much more. Richard had promised her that she was not alone anymore, but even as he spoke those words, the weight of the situation still hung over them. He had to do more. He had to make sure Anna understood that her past wouldn't define her future. Richard had made a decision. He would confront his own fears, his own doubts, and he would make sure that Anna knew she was part of something bigger, a family, his family. But as the hours passed and the night grew deeper, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. It wasn't just the uncertainty in Anna's eyes when she spoke of her past. It was the strange sense of unease he felt around his own home. Despite the warmth of the house, despite the wealth and the luxury that surrounded them, Richard couldn't help but feel the weight of a deeper truth. Anna had been abandoned by the world, but now she had found a place where she was wanted. Richard had to protect her, protect them all. He stood up from the chair, pacing across the room. It was late, and Ethan was still sleeping peacefully upstairs, but Richard's mind wouldn't allow him to rest. He had to know what was going on. He needed to find out who had done this to Anna, who had left her to fend for herself. As he reached for the phone to call David, he heard a soft knock on the door. His heart stopped. He wasn't expecting anyone. As he opened the door, he found Anna standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking, her voice quiet. "Mr. Bennett, I need to talk to you." Richard's pulse quickened as he stepped aside, letting her enter. "What's going on, Anna?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Anna stepped into the room, her hands fidgeting nervously. I don't know what to do," she said softly, her eyes not meeting his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being part of your family, but I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this." Richard's heart ached for her. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the same vulnerability that she had hidden so well. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be scared, Anna," he said, his voice filled with reassurance. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to face this by yourself." Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But I've always been alone," she whispered. "I've always had to take care of myself. I've never known what it's like to have someone who cares." Richard could feel the pain in her words. He could feel the weight of her past, the years of loneliness and survival. "You don't have to take care of yourself anymore, Anna," he said softly. "You have us now, and we're going to take care of you, just like you took care of Ethan." The room fell silent for a moment, as Anna absorbed his words. Then, she took a deep breath, her eyes slowly lifting to meet his. "I'm scared that I'm going to mess this up," she said quietly. Richard smiled gently, his hand still on her shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect, Anna. You don't have to have it all figured out. We're a family now, and we're going to figure it out together." Anna swallowed hard, her face softening as she looked at him. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Richard shook his head. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You've already done enough. You saved Ethan. You saved us all." Anna smiled, a small, unsure smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. Richard knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that it would take time for Anna to fully trust in this new reality, but he also knew that they were on the right path. They were building something together, something that could never be broken. As Richard held her gaze, he felt the weight of the moment. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. He had found something that mattered more than anything else in the world: family. He could feel the weight of her past, the years of loneliness and survival. "You don't have to take care of yourself anymore, Anna," he said softly. "You have us now, and we're going to take care of you, just like you took care of Ethan." The room fell silent for a moment, as Anna absorbed his words. Then, she took a deep breath, her eyes slowly lifting to meet his. "I'm scared that I'm going to mess this up," she said quietly. Richard smiled gently, his hand still on her shoulder. They would face whatever challenges came their way, together. The next morning, Richard woke up early, feeling a sense of renewed purpose. He had a lot to do, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it all. He glanced over at Anna, who was sitting at the kitchen table, eating breakfast with Ethan. They were laughing together, and for a moment, Richard could only watch, a smile tugging at his lips. The family he had always dreamed of was finally within reach, and he knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. They would be there for each other, just as they had always needed to be. Days passed, and the weight of uncertainty began to lift, though it still lingered in the corners of Richard's mind. Ethan's recovery was slow, but steady. The doctors were optimistic, and every small improvement brought a sense of relief. But for Richard, something deeper was at play. He knew Anna's past was a secret she had kept hidden for so long, and even though he had promised her that she was part of their family now, a small part of him still felt uncertain. He needed to confront his fears, not only for his sake but for hers. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Anna's story didn't end with what she had shared. Something was still unfinished, but for now, he had to focus on the present, on Ethan's recovery, on being the father he should have always been. One night, Richard stood in the kitchen, looking out of the window as the rain softly tapped against the glass. The night was quiet, peaceful even, but there was an underlying tension that Richard couldn't ignore. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside him. As he prepared to go upstairs, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from David. "We need to talk," it read. Richard's stomach tightened. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door, heading for his office. It wasn't like David to be cryptic. Richard entered the study, his mind racing. He dialed David's number and waited, the silence on the other end of the line almost deafening. "David?" Richard said once the line clicked. "What's going on?" David's voice was low and serious. "I've got information, Richard. It's not just about Anna. There's more to her story." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. David sighed, a long, drawn-out breath that told Richard something serious was coming. "I've dug deeper into her background, and I found something troubling. Someone's looking for her, someone from her past. I'm not sure who, but they've been trying to track her down. The people I talked to, they're worried." Richard's mind spun. His immediate thought was Anna. Asterisk. Who could want to find her? Asterisk. How do you know? Richard asked, his voice tight with concern. "I've got sources," David said. "The people who know her, or at least, who think they know her. There are whispers, Richard. It's not good." Richard stood still, his body frozen with shock. He couldn't process what David was saying. Anna had been through so much already. She didn't deserve this. "What are you suggesting?" Richard's voice cracked. "Are you saying she's in danger?" David's response was measured, cautious. "I'm saying we need to be careful. Whoever is looking for her, they don't have good intentions. It could get ugly." Richard's pulse raced as he thought of Anna, the sweet, selfless girl who had saved his son's life. He couldn't let anything happen to her. "I won't let anything happen to her," Richard said, his voice firm. "I'll protect her, but I need to know who's behind this. I need answers, David." "I'm on it," David replied, his tone resolute. "I'll find out what I can, but be careful. I'll keep you updated." Richard hung up the phone and sat back in his chair, trying to make sense of everything. He thought of Anna again, of her quiet strength and the way she had helped his son when no one else could. He thought of how she had opened up to him, trusted him with her past. He couldn't let anyone take that from her. As he sat in the dim light of the study, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. Asterisk. Who could want to hurt her? Asterisk. He had promised to protect her, to give her the family she had never known, but now, it seemed that the past wasn't finished with her. And as the night wore on, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only beginning. The next day, Richard called Anna into his office. She had been helping Ethan in the morning, making sure he was comfortable as he continued to rest, but Richard knew that now was the time to talk. When Anna walked into the room, she smiled at him, but Richard could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of everything, the recovery, the secrets, the uncertainty was starting to take its toll on her. "Anna," Richard began, his voice calm but firm, "there's something I need to tell you." She sat down across from him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft. Richard looked at her for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. He couldn't protect her if he didn't confront the truth. "I found something out," he said. "David's been looking into your past, and he's found something disturbing. Someone's been searching for you." Anna's face immediately paled. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard shook his head, his heart sinking as he saw the fear in her eyes. "We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're looking for you. I don't know why, but we need to be prepared. I won't let anyone hurt you, Anna." Anna's breath caught in her throat as she leaned forward, her hands shaking slightly. "I never wanted you to know," she whispered. "I never wanted anyone to know. That's why I ran. I didn't want anyone to find me." Richard leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with empathy. "You don't have to run anymore. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone, Anna. We're going to protect you." Anna looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Richard placed a hand on hers, offering a reassuring smile. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "You're part of this family, and nothing is going to tear us apart." The weight of the moment hung heavy between them, but for the first time, Richard felt a sense of clarity. They would face whatever came next. Together, they would protect each other. And the truth, whatever it was, would come to light. But for now, they had each other, and that was all that mattered. Days passed in a blur of uncertainty and anxiety. Richard knew that the clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting. Anna's past, the one she had carefully kept hidden for so long, was beginning to catch up with her. Despite his promises to protect her, Richard couldn't ignore the creeping fear that something worse was on its way. David had uncovered that someone was actively searching for Anna, someone from her past, someone who had a reason to find her. Richard couldn't shake the image of Anna's fearful face when she had learned the truth, the realization that the person she had been running from was closing in. He couldn't stand the thought of her being dragged back into a life she had escaped. No matter what it took, Richard vowed he would protect her. But the question remained who was looking for her, and why. The mansion felt strangely empty despite the presence of his family. Anna had been more distant since the conversation, quieter, always looking over her shoulder as if waiting for someone to knock at the door. Richard had to get to the bottom of it. He had to find out who was behind this, and he had to do it quickly. As the evening wore on, Richard found himself in his study once again, staring at the piles of documents and papers before him. He was supposed to be focused, but his mind kept drifting to Anna, to the danger that lurked in the shadows, threatening to pull her back into the life she had worked so hard to escape. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another message from David. "I've got something," it read. Richard's heart raced as he quickly dialed David's number. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice urgent. David's response was brief but loaded with tension. "I found the person who's looking for Anna," he said. "It's someone from her past, someone dangerous. But I need you to be careful. They know where she is." Richard's stomach dropped. The gravity of the situation was finally sinking in. Someone dangerous was looking for Anna, and they were closing in. "What do we do?" Richard asked, his voice thick with fear. "We can't let them take her." David hesitated before responding. "We need to get Anna out of here. We can't take any chances. I've set up a place for her, a safe house. It's the best option we have right now." Richard didn't need to be told twice. He had to protect her. Anna had already been through so much, and now she was being hunted by someone from her past. Richard's heart ached for her. He couldn't let her face this alone. He immediately got up, rushing to find Anna. He found her in the living room, sitting by the window, staring out at the dark night. She turned as he entered, her face betraying the exhaustion and worry that had been building for days. "Anna," Richard said, his voice steady, but filled with urgency. "We need to talk." Anna looked at him, her eyes widening slightly, sensing the shift in his tone. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard walked over to her, kneeling down in front of her. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Someone is looking for you, and we can't wait any longer. I've arranged for you to go to a safe place. It's the only way to protect you." Anna blinked in surprise, her face pale as the weight of his words sank in. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "Who's looking for me?" Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's someone from your past, Anna. Someone who wants to hurt you. But I won't let that happen. I've made arrangements for you to go somewhere safe. Anna looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. I don't want to run anymore, she said, her voice barely audible. I don't want to keep hiding. Richard's heart broke for her. He could see the fear and the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of a life she never asked for. But he also saw the strength she had shown. She had been running for so long, but now, she had a chance to be safe, to be free. You don't have to hide anymore, Anna, he said gently. You'll be safe, and when all of this is over, we'll figure it out. We'll make sure you have a life here, with us. You won't be alone anymore. Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and relief. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Richard smiled softly, his heart filled with determination. You don't have to do it alone. You have me, and you have Ethan. We're all in this together. He stood up and extended his hand to her. Let me take care of you, Anna. Let me help you find the peace you deserve. Anna hesitated for a moment before slowly reaching out and taking his hand. The fear that had gripped her seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaky. Thank you for everything. Richard nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. You don't have to thank me, he said softly. You're part of this family now, and we're going to keep you safe. I promise. As they walked toward the door, Richard's mind raced. They had no time to waste. Whoever was searching for Anna was getting closer, and they couldn't afford to wait. He had to get her out of there, to the safe house, before it was too late. But as Richard glanced at Anna, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they were going to make it through this, together. The safe house was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, a small but secure place nestled between dense trees that provided privacy and isolation. The drive had been long, and the closer they got, the more Richard felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind raced with thoughts of Anna's past, of the danger she was still in, and the people who were hunting her. He couldn't shake the fear that no matter how far they ran, there would always be someone in the shadows, someone who knew the truth about her. But for now, the most important thing was getting her to safety. The road was bumpy, and the weather wasn't helping. The rain had started to fall again, coming down in sheets, making the journey even harder. Richard glanced at Anna, sitting silently beside him in the car. She hadn't said much since they left the mansion, and he could tell that the weight of it all was starting to wear on her. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and he could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. He reached out and gently touched her hand. She looked up at him, her expression tired, but grateful. We're almost there, Richard said softly, trying to reassure her. Anna nodded, but she didn't speak. Richard understood. He knew this wasn't easy for her. She had spent most of her life running, hiding, and now she had to face an entirely new reality. For so long, she had been on her own, having to rely on her own strength to survive. Now, she was being given a chance at something different, a chance at a new life. Richard's thoughts were interrupted when the car slowed and turned into the driveway of the small house. The area was quiet, surrounded by thick trees and a sense of calm that seemed out of place given everything they had been through. They parked, and Richard immediately got out of the car to open the door for Anna. She stepped out, her eyes scanning the area before she turned to look at Richard. "This is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Richard smiled gently, nodding. "This is it. You'll be safe here." Anna hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. Richard walked beside her, his hand still lightly resting on her shoulder. "There's no one here but us. It's isolated, which is exactly what we need right now," Richard explained. As they entered the small house, Richard could feel the tension in the air. But it was different from the tension they had felt in the city. Here, it was the kind of tension that came with starting something new, something uncertain, but hopeful. The house was modest but comfortable, with basic furniture and enough space for them to live without drawing attention. There was a small kitchen, a living area, and 2 bedrooms, everything they would need for the time being. Richard made sure to check all the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure before turning to Anna. We'll stay here until we know it's safe to go back, Richard said. You can rest, relax, and take a break from everything that's been happening. This is your chance to breathe. Anna looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the simple furnishings. She seemed overwhelmed, unsure of how to feel about all of this. I never thought I'd be here, she whispered. Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her words. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Anna. No one will hurt you here. I won't let them. Anna gave him a small, uncertain smile. I don't know how to feel, she said. I've spent so long looking over my shoulder. I never thought I'd be safe. Not like this. Richard stepped closer to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore, he said. You're part of this family now, and we will protect you. We'll figure out the rest later, but for now, just know that you're safe. Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of relief. For the first time in a long time, she let herself relax, allowing herself to trust that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace. As Richard turned to unpack a few things, he glanced over at Anna, who was sitting on the couch, staring out the window into the dark, rainy night. He could tell she was thinking, probably reliving everything she had been through, the fear, the loneliness, the struggle. Richard could see that Anna had never been able to fully let her guard down, but he knew this was the first step toward healing. They were here now. This was her chance to have a life without fear, to live without constantly running. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible, and Richard was determined to help her build that life. He had already lost so much in his life, his marriage, his sense of security, but he had found something in Anna, something worth fighting for. As the night wore on, Richard and Anna sat together, talking about everything and nothing. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the small house, there was a sense of quiet peace. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. They had found a place to call home, and nothing could take that away. It was just the beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. And for the first time, Richard felt that the future might be bright again, for him, for Anna, and for the family they had become. Weeks passed, and the house, once filled with tension, began to feel like a home. Richard had kept his promise to Anna, providing her with safety and support as she slowly began to let her guard down. She was still cautious, still carrying the weight of her past, but each day was a small step toward healing. Richard, too, had changed. This was her chance to have a life without fear, to live without constantly running. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible, and Richard was determined to help her build that life. He had already lost so much in his life, his marriage, his sense of security, but he had found something in Anna, something worth fighting for. As the night wore on, Richard and Anna sat together, talking about everything and nothing. As Richard turned to unpack a few things, he glanced over at Anna, who was sitting on the couch, staring out the window into the dark, rainy night. He could tell she was thinking, probably reliving everything she had been through, the fear, the loneliness, the struggle. Richard could see that Anna had never been able to fully let her guard down, but he knew this was the first step toward healing. They were here now. The urgency that had once clouded his thoughts had begun to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of peace. The mansion, which had once seemed like a symbol of everything he had lost, now felt like a place of comfort. Ethan's recovery was progressing, and though there were still days when he seemed distant or exhausted, there was no doubt he was returning to his old self. Richard could see it in his eyes. His son was healing, not just physically but emotionally. Ethan was talking about school, his voice filled with excitement as he shared the small victories of his day. Richard listened intently, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Ethan had become the child he remembered, full of life, full of hope. Anna, who had once stayed silent in the background, now joined the conversation with ease, asking questions, offering advice, and laughing alongside them. It was as if the walls she had built around herself were finally coming down. Later that evening, as they cleaned up together, Richard caught Anna's eye. There was a new softness in her gaze, a new sense of peace that hadn't been there before. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Anna paused for a moment, her fingers still wiping the counter. "I'm okay," she said, her voice quiet but confident. "I think I'm finally starting to believe it, that I'm safe, that I'm really a part of something." Richard's heart swelled with pride. He had watched her grow from a scared, withdrawn girl into someone who had found her place in the world, someone who had learned to trust again. "You are a part of something," Richard said, his voice full of meaning. "You're part of this family now, and we're here for you, always." Anna smiled at him, the first truly free smile Richard had seen from her in all the time she had been with them. It was the smile of someone who had found a home. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Richard nodded, his eyes filled with warmth. "No need to thank me. We're family." The next morning, as Richard stood by the window of his office, looking out over the garden, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The storm that had threatened to tear their lives apart had passed, and in its place, there was calm. Anna, Ethan, and he together. He had promised to protect them, and now he knew that he had. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer held power over their lives. They had taken control of their own futures. Richard smiled to himself, a soft, contented smile. They were safe. They were together. And for the first time, in a long time, Richard felt hopeful. He turned away from the window, his heart light with the knowledge that the storm had passed. There was no more running, no more fear. Only the future, a future they would face as a family, united and stronger than ever. He walked into the living room where Anna and Ethan were sitting, laughing and playing a game. The warmth in the room filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had lost so much, but in the end, he had found something far greater: his family, and that was something no storm could ever take away. In this emotional journey of transformation, the story revolves around a young girl, Anna, who has been through unimaginable struggles and is now finding her place in a new family. As the story unfolds, you will witness how she overcomes her past, builds trust, and becomes part of something bigger than herself. These black stories, highlight themes of resilience, love, and the importance of family, portraying the strength of a young girl who learns that she is not alone. Throughout the story, the struggles she faces and the support she receives from her new family inspire hope and healing. Black stories, like Anna's, are not just about survival, but about thriving against all odds, embracing vulnerability, and finding courage to face the unknown. As the narrative reaches its heartwarming conclusion, the bond between Anna, her new family, and the promise of safety and love become the ultimate message of redemption and new beginnings. These black stories demonstrate the power of love and belonging, as Anna starts to believe that she is truly part of a family, and her fears of abandonment are finally put to rest. Through the lens of this powerful journey, black stories, like this, remind us all that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always a way forward, and the future can be brighter when shared with those who care. In the end, the hope and healing found in this black story resonate deeply, reminding us of the power of human connection and the importance of embracing each other through life's trials.